The federal government's push to deal with harassment inside the Mounties is getting pushback from some RCMP officers. The Mounted Police Professional Association says the new bill, the bill is called Enhancing RCMP Accountability Act. They say it violates the force's charter. The bill to reform the grievance process passed third reading in the House, but some RCMP officers are wondering, do the new rules go too far, and does it simply give too much power to the RCMP commissioner? And will it do the job to actually tackle internal complaints? We're going to get some perspective on this. In Moncton is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice, Robert Goguen. Thanks for being here. In St. John's is the NDP defence critic, Jack Harrison. From Charlottetown, Wayne Easter, the Liberal International trade critic. Mr. Goguen, let me start with you. The act was crafted at the height of the fallout from some very high-profile allegations of harassment within the force. The legislation is meant to address the force's internal disciplinary and grievance process. But the Mounted Police Professional Association says it essentially violates their Charter of Rights. Does the government believe this will survive a charter challenge?
Well, absolutely, we believe it will. The Department of Justice, we have a very rigorous process put into place to make sure that each bill that we bring forth meets the constitutional test. And of course, this was done in this case. The same process has been followed since the early 1990s. And, perhaps it's understandable the RCMP might look at this from a point of view of constitutional violation because they're always dealing with the issue of criminal law. They're dealing with the issue of sanctions, which includes loss of freedom, imprisonment, penalties. But this whole thing is done not in a criminal law context. It's done, in fact, in an administrative law complex. It's done in the context of a work relationship where, there are certain sanctions which are put in place. And, those investigative reviews and those sanctions that are put in place are very consistent with other elements which are present in other work areas, not only in the RCMP. So it's compare apples to apples.
Okay, so let me just bring someone into the conversation because we've just reached the spokesperson for the Mounted Police Professional Association. His group has the concerns about the bill, and let me bring Rob Creaser in. Rob Creaser, thanks for joining us. Can you give us your main concern about this legislation?
Well, we don't believe it is charter compliant, and in fact, in the third reading of the bill that occurred on March 6th, Mr. Pat Martin, the MP for Winnipeg Central, brought up the fact that there's currently a matter going before the federal court involving a former DOJ senior advisor by the name of Edgar Schmidt. And he's advising that since 1993, the DOJ has adopted a policy that has basically lowered the threshold of new legislation to the point where if there's a 5% chance that it will be charter compliant, parliamentarians are putting that law forward. If, in fact, this is bore out as we move through the federal court, there's many pieces of legislation that are probably not charter compliant, and our concerns are clearly that this one isn't, and we're focusing a ton of power in the hands of one man, and that being the commissioner of the RCMP. Now, if he's a benevolent dictator, that's great. But he's going to be judge, jury, and executioner here, and he's going to have the ability to fire members for things like economic efficiency. That's a clear concern.
So will you be taking this to court because of your concerns that this concentrates power in the hands of the commissioner?
We hope not to. It's almost a done deal at this stage. I understand we're going, the bill has been passed through Parliament and we're going to the Senate. But many of our 24,000 members aren't even aware of this legislation and some of the ramifications within it. There's been very little communication. When I testified before the parliamentary committee on the last day, in the last hour, indicating some of our concerns, I think the committee had given another 2 hours for amendments. So how serious did they really want to hear from the frontline members? I don't think they were serious at all.
All right. Rob Creaser, spokesperson for the Mounted Police Professional Association of Canada, thanks for giving us your view on this. And let me just put it back to our panel of MPs. In listening to that, Robert Goguen, let me quickly go back to you. What do you make of his concerns?
Well, certainly it's a certain way of looking at things, and he looks at it from a different angle than we do. I mean, we test the constitutionally all these things. He's talked about the Schmidt case. I won't comment about the Schmidt case. It's presently before the courts, and that's Mr. Smith's point of view. And, of course, he's taken it to the court to have determined whether or not he's right or not. But, you know, our government has have a number of successful court challenges, which basically were upheld. The Supreme Court of Canada upheld our drunk driving provisions, which were challenged on a constitutional basis. It was the Supreme Court of Canada. The mandatory sentencing for regular shootings was upheld by the Ontario Superior Court. The Manitoba Court of Appeal upheld their legislation for limiting two-for-one sentencing. Legislation on the limited use of house arrest was upheld by the Court of Appeal of Quebec. There's a process in place. We feel that our legislation in all cases is common sense and meets the constitutional test. And, I mean, there's an outcry for action to be taken. There hasn't been anything done with the RCMP Act, I believe, for probably some 25 years. And, of course, the complaints aren't from yesterday. They've been going for a while. Something has to be done. The new commissioner has said that he wants to bring back, you know, the pride of the National Police Force, and we're certainly going to work with them very closely to make sure that that's in place.
Well, let me bring in Jack Harris and Wayne Easter. Jack Harris, what's your view about this? They're trying. The commissioner says he wants more power to deal with issues like harassment.
Well, you know, we have grave concerns about this bill, not the constitutionality so much, but what it's doing here is not actually modernizing the bill. It's not dealing with the issues of harassment. I think the issue of harassment, the word harassment is only mentioned once. What this bill does do is, as Mr. Goguen says, it gives more power to the commissioner, but it doesn't solve the problem of harassment. We had 13 amendments brought forward to try to deal with that issue. They were ignored, and each one of them were voted down. You know, concentrating power in one person's hands is not necessarily going to solve the problem. We don't write legislation for one person. We wanted to modernize the act. We want to have civilian oversight. We want to have a management procedure that's actually fair and balanced and responds to complaints of harassment and provides due process for people. You can't just give one person the power to fire people because he or she thinks it's the right thing to do. That's not the way to solve the problem. We've already got a very hierarchical organization, and that has proven to be one of the biggest problems in dealing with harassment within the RCMP. This bill doesn't fix that at all.
Wayne Easter, what's your view?
Well, there's really several issues here, Evan. First, with regard to the RCMP charter itself, the representatives of the rank and file had been following the same process that they're in for many years, and that, in my time, has not been seen as a violation of the RCMP charter, so to speak. And the group that we just talked to has long wanted basically a union to represent the rank and file. So there's a big difference of opinion there, and the rank and file RCMP members are split. But with this bill specifically, really Commissioner Paulson requested that the government move forward in this bill. They didn't come to the table easily on this one, and this is all about accountability and transparency within the RCMP. I do think the gentleman who spoke, though, does have a point in terms of charter rights and freedoms. We now know that not every piece of legislation this government has brought forward has been checked by the Department of Justice for whether it clears the charter rights and freedoms or not. So that's an issue that somebody else will have to take up someday, and that's a problem with this government in terms of ramming stuff through without proper debate. And on the NDP amendments, we would have supported some of them.
So do you think should the Senate amend this bill?
Well, that's entirely up to the Senate, but I do want to point out in the Commons, which has ultimately responsibility here, what happens with Conservative members if an opposition NDP Liberal put forward amendments. It's just ruled out of hand. Let's not even discuss it. Let's just shut it down. That's what's not working in Parliament. These bills should be improved before they get to the Senate.
All right, last question. Mr. Goguen, does this concentrate too much in the power, rather, in the hands of the commissioner?
No, I don't believe it does. Look, the most informal, the only sanction can be done in informal procedures right now is losing a vacation day. And not every single infraction is going to lead to the firing or the dismissal of a member of the RCMP. We believe it's a balanced approach. And listen, we can be criticized. Perhaps the bill is not perfect. But, I mean, complaints on the RCMP are not from yesterday. And, you know, Mr. Easter sat there as Solicitor General for a number of years. The complaints were happening. Nothing was being done. So,
yes, we put them to the Commissioner, the public
if you
complaints
don't.
against the RCMP, and you guys fired the best Commissioner of public complaints we had.
Nothing was done.
You fired him. You let him go.
Happy Easter.
Paul Kennedy. All right, last word, Jack Harris. I guess my question is, the whole point of this bill is to expedite the process so the commissioner can deal with harassment in the force. That was the whole point of it. What's wrong with that?
Well, you know, you can't just turn over the RCMP to the commissioner and run roughshod over the whole processes that we have. We asked for an independent civilian oversight with the powers of appeal. We want to protect not only the people who are being harassed, but the people who are whistleblowing on being harassed, and also the people who, like Mr. Kresser's group, who said, look, you know, this is the only police force in the country that doesn't have collective bargaining and a proper democratic union situation so that the rights of Mounties are protected. So there's a whole lot of things that need to be done. You can't just say we'll have a dictator in charge of the RCMP and that's going to fix everything. That won't work.
I think one good point in terms of the bill, though, is you can bring in other police forces to review a problem within the RCMP.
Well,
previously, the RCMP reviewed itself, and that was a problem in the eyes of the public.
I'm sorry, there's still a problem there because the police is still allowed, the RCMP will still be allowed to look after and investigate themselves, and that's wrong. We tried to fix that too, and they refused.
All right, I got to leave it there. Rob Goguen, I appreciate your time today. Jack Harris and Wayne Easter, thanks so much, gentlemen, for informing us about this one. Thanks.
Night, gents.
Night.
Thank you, Evan.